I suppose you're Mr. Matthew Cuthbert of Green Gables? I'm very glad to see you. I was beginning to be afraid you weren't coming for me, and I was imagining if all the things that might have happened prevent you. I've made up my mind that if you didn't come for me tonight, I'd go down the track to the big wild cherry tree at the bend and climb up into it to stay a whole night. I wouldn't be a bit afraid, and it would be lovely to sleep in a wild cherry tree, all white with bloom in the moonshine, don't you think? You could imagine if you were dwelling in a marble house, couldn't you? And I was quite sure you would come for me in the morning if you didn't tonight. Matthew had taken this grown little hand awkwardly in his. Then and there he decided what to do. He could not tell this child with the glowing eyes that there had been a mistake. He would take her home and let Marilla do that. She couldn't be left about Griever anyhow, no matter what mistake had been made, so all question and explanation might as well be deferred until he was safely back in Green Gables. "I'm sorry I was late," he said shyly. "Come along. The horse is over in the yard. Give me your bag." "Oh, I can carry it," the child responded cheerfully. "It isn't heavy. I've got all my worldly good in it, but it isn't heavy. And if it isn't carried just a certain way, the handle pulls out, so it should be caught on the exact back of it. It's an extremely all-carpet bag. Oh, I'm very glad you've come. Even if it would have been nice to sleep in a wild cherry tree. We've got to drive a long piece, haven't we? Mrs. Spencer said it was 8 miles. I'm glad because I love driving. Oh, it seems so wonderful that I got to live with you and belong to you. I've never belonged to anybody, not really, but this family was the worst. I've only been in for months, but that was enough. It was enough. I wouldn't suppose you ever were in an asylum, so you can't possibly understand what it is like. It's worse than anything you can imagine. Mrs. Spencer said it was wicked to me to talk like that, but I didn't mean to be wicked. It's so easy to be wicked without knowing it, isn't it? They were good, you know, the asylum people, but there was so little scope of imagination in the asylum, only just and other orphans. It was pretty interesting to imagine things about them. To imagine that perhaps the girl who sat next to you was really the daughter of an abandoned girl who has been stolen away from her parents in her infancy by a cruel nurse who died before she could confess. I used to lie awake at night and imagine things like that, because I didn't have time in the day. I guess that's why I'm so thin. I am dreadfully thin, ain't I? There isn't a pig on my bones. I'd love to imagine I'm nice and plump, with dimples in my elbows. With this, Matthew's companion stopped talking, partly because she was out of breath, and partly because they had been much tobacco. Not another word, she said, until they had left the village and were driving down the steep little hill, the road part of which had been cut so deeply into the soft soil that the banks, rich with blooming wild cherry trees and sleek white birches, were several feet above their heads. The child put out her hand and broke off the branch of wild plum that brushed against the side of the buggy. "Isn't that beautiful? What did the tree leaving out of the bag, all white and lacy, make you think of?" she asked. Well, now I don't know," said Matthew. "Why, a bride, of course, a bridal in white with a lovely misty veil. I've never seen one, but I can imagine one what she'll look like. I never expect to be a bride myself. I'm so I don't ever want to marry me, unless it might be a foreign missionary. I suppose a foreign missionary mightn't be very particular, but I do hope that someday I'll share a white dress. That is my highest idea of earthly bliss. I just love pretty clothes, and I've never had a pretty dress in my life that I could remember. But of course it's all my wish forward to, isn't it? And then I can imagine if I dressed gorgeously. This morning that I left the asylum, I felt so ashamed because I had to wear this hard, wincey dress. All the orphans have to wear them. A merchant in Helpton last winter donated 300 yards of wincey to the asylum. Some people said it was because he couldn't sell it, but I rather believed he was out of kindness of his heart, wouldn't you? When I got on the train, I thought it was Abby must be looking at me and pitying me. But I just want to work in that I had a most beautiful playblue silk dress, because when you are imagining it, you might as well something worthwhile. And a big hat, all flowers and nodding plumes, and a gold watch, and king gloves and boots. I felt cheered up right away. I enjoyed my trip to the island with all my might. I wasn't a bit sick, coming over in a boat. Neither was Mrs. Spencer about to generally eat. She said she hadn't time to get sick watching to see that I didn't fall overboard. She said she never saw the bit of me Mrs. Prowl knew about. But if it kept her from being seasick, it's a mercy, isn't it? And I wanted to see everything is to be seen in that boat because I didn't know whether I'd ever had another opportunity. Oh, there are a lot more cherry trees all in bloom. This island is the bloomest place. I just love it already, and I'm so glad I could live here. I've always heard the Prince Edward Island was the prettiest place in the world, and now I used to imagine I was living here, but I never really expected I would. It's delightful when your imaginations come true, isn't it? But those red roses are so funny. When it comes into the train at Charlottetown and the red rose began to flash past, I asked Mrs. Spencer what made them red, and she said she didn't know, and for pity's sake not to ask her any more questions. She said I must have asked her 1,000 already. I supposed I had to. But how can you find out about things if you don't ask questions? And what does make the rose red? Oh, well, no, I don't know, said Matthew. Well, that is one of the things to find out sometime. Isn't it splendid to think of all the things that are to find out about? It just makes me feel glad to be alive. It's such an interesting world. It wouldn't be half so interesting if you knew all about everything, would it? There would be no scope for imagination then, would there? But am I talking too much? People are always telling me I do. Would you rather I didn't talk? If you say so, I'll stop. I can't stop when I make up my mind to it, although it's difficult. Matthew, much to his own surprise, was enjoying himself. Like most quiet hogs, he liked talkative people when we were talking themselves and not expect him to keep up his end of it. But he never expected to enjoy the society of a little girl. Women were bad enough of all countries, but little girls were worse. He detested the way they had of sidling past him timidly with sidewise glances, as if he expected him to gobble him up in a mouthful if he ventured to say a word. This was the Avonlea type of well-bred little girl. But this freckled witch was very different, and although he found it rather difficult for his slower intelligence to keep up with her brisk mental processes, he thought that he kind of liked her chat. So he said, as shyly as usual, "Oh, you can talk as much as you like. I don't mind." "Oh, I'm so glad. I know you and I are going to get along together fine. It's such a relief to talk when one wants to not be told children should be seen, not heard. I've had this said to me a million times if I had once. And people laugh at me because I use big words. But if you have big ideas, you have to use big words to express them, haven't you?" "Well, no, that seems reasonable," said Matthew. Mrs. Spencer said my tongue might be hung in the middle, but it isn't. It firmly fastened to one end. Mrs. Spencer said the place was named Green Gables. I asked her all about it, and she said it was trees all around it. I was gladder than ever. I just love trees. And the world, and he told about the asylum. Only a few poor teeny-weeny things out front with water cages about them. They just look like orphans themselves, those trees. It used to make me want to cry to look at them. I just say to them, "Oh, you poor little things. If you're out in the great backwoods with other trees all around you, with little marshes, June bells growing over your roots, and a brook far away, and birds singing in your branches, you could cry, couldn't you? You can where you are, and it's just exactly how you feel, little trees. I felt so sorry to leave them behind this morning. You do get so attached to things like that, don't you?"